I used to think HOA horror stories were just exaggerations. Petty letters, picky rules, neighbors with too much time on their hands. Then one night, my equipment barn went up in flames. Less than a week after the HOA president looked me dead in the eye and promised me that things change unexpectedly. My name is Mason Carter, and my family's farm sits outside Redwood Hollow, Missouri, on the same stretch of land my grandfather worked before. Gated neighborhoods even existed. Before the matching mailboxes. Before the perfect lawns and the people who act like a board meeting gives them the right to control the whole world. But to Crystal Ridge Estates, my land wasn't a legacy. It was a blank space on a map. Unused potential. Something they could buy, bulldoze, and turn into more identical houses. And to their HOA president, Tracy Whitmore, it wasn't just land. It was the one piece she couldn't stand not owning. I told her no. Simple, clean, final. After that, everything shifted. She sent a so-called safety inspector onto my property, and the way he moved through my barn didn't feel like an inspection. It felt like he was memorizing it. Fuel drums, wiring, exits, blind spots, every detail that could be blamed later. Then came the fire, and it didn't stay on my side of the fence. The wind grabbed those flames like a weapon and hurled them toward the HOA neighborhood, straight toward their perfect little fantasy, like the whole community was about to burn down with me. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I grew up on this land with dirt under my nails and sunrise in my eyes. My dad didn't hand me a trust fund or some fancy head start. He handed me work, real work. The kind that leaves your palms calloused, your back sore, and your pride earned. This farm wasn't just where I lived, it was the only place that ever felt like it made sense. Every fence post, every worn-out tool, every patch of soil had a story tied to my family's name. So when Crystal Ridge Estates showed up, it felt like someone dropped a glossy magazine right onto the edge of my life. Overnight, the open fields beside my property turned into rows of perfect houses, with perfect lawns and perfect little mailboxes lined up like soldiers. People moved in, smiling like they were auditioning for commercial-friendly waves, polite greetings, clean shoes that had never touched mud. At first, we stayed out of each other's way. I didn't bother them. They didn't bother me. But that didn't last. Because once those homes were settled, they started noticing my farm like it was an eyesore that had the audacity to exist. It started small, like all the worst things do. One week, it was a complaint about tractor noise in the morning. The next, an email about odor concerns, as if farms are supposed to smell like lavender candles. Then came an anonymous message claiming my irrigation was draining community water resources. That one almost made me laugh, until I realized something. I wasn't even in their HOA. Not one penny of my money went to their clubhouse. I never signed their bylaws. I never agreed to their rules. But the way they talked to me, you'd think I was just another lot owner who hadn't read the fine print. And the person driving all of it was their HOA president, Tracy Whitmore. She didn't act like a neighborhood volunteer. She acted like a ruler, like that gated entrance gave her authority over anything her eyes landed on. I saw her a few times from a distance, always dressed sharp, always walking with that "I'm important" posture, always surrounded by people who nodded too quickly. Then the first real move came. I found a thick envelope tucked into my mailbox like it belonged there. No stamp. No return address. Just my name typed neatly on the front, like whoever sent it didn't feel the need to follow normal rules. Inside was a community offer to purchase my land, not a conversation, not a request, an expectation. It was written in that polite, official-sounding language people use when they're trying to sound reasonable while doing something completely outrageous. They praised the area's growth. They talked about development opportunities. They promised it would be mutually beneficial. But all I could hear between the lines was the real message: sell. I stared at that letter for a long moment, then grabbed a pen and wrote one word across the bottom so hard the ink almost tore through the page. Nex. I slid it right back into the envelope and delivered it to their fancy little clubhouse mailbox the same way they delivered it to me, quietly, without asking permission, like their entitlement deserved to be returned with the same cold energy. And that should have been the end. Instead, it was the beginning. 2 days later, the harassment started like someone flipped a switch. Official-looking warnings began showing up, printed on letterhead, signed with fake authority, written like I'd already been found guilty of something. They claimed my fencing was unsafe, my barn was a fire hazard, my fuel storage was an emergency risk, and somehow my working farm was endangering property values. It would have been funny if it wasn't so deliberate. Because Tracy wasn't trying to fix anything. She was trying to squeeze me, trying to make life on my own land feel like a constant battle, like I couldn't take a breath without another complaint landing in my lap. The goal wasn't compliance. The goal was exhaustion. Wear me down until selling felt easier than standing my ground. Then she showed up in person. A black SUV rolled down my dirt road like it had taken a wrong turn out of a luxury dealership. It stopped at my gate, engine still running, tinted windows watching me like dark eyes. Tracy stepped out wearing a white blouse so spotless it looked like it had never seen a speck of dust in its life. Her hair was perfect, her shoes were clean, and her smile was polished, friendly on the surface, sharp underneath. She walked up like she was meeting a client, not confronting a man on his own land. "Mason," she said smoothly, "this area is evolving. Growth is coming. You don't want to be the one holding everyone back." The way she said everyone didn't sound like community. It sounded like pressure. Like a crowd behind her, waiting for me to fold. I crossed my arms. "I'm not selling." Her smile stayed in place, but her eyes changed, just for a second. A flicker of annoyance, like she couldn't believe I'd said it so easily. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice like we were sharing a secret. "Some offers don't come twice," she said softly. "And some things change unexpectedly." She held my gaze just long enough for the threat to sink in, then turned around and walked back to her SUV like she hadn't just lit a fuse in my chest. I watched her drive away, dust barely rising behind those tires, and I told myself she was just another HOA bully who liked hearing herself talk. But that night, I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, listening to the wind brush against the windows, and for the first time in my life, my own home didn't feel completely safe. Because that wasn't an HOA issue anymore. That was a warning. After Tracy's visit, the harassment stopped so suddenly it almost felt like a trick. No more letters stuffed in my mailbox. No more warnings printed on fake official paper. No more threats dressed up as polite concern. Just silence. And I learned something real fast. When someone like Tracy Whitmore goes quiet, it doesn't mean she backed off. People like her don't get humbled. They don't suddenly respect boundaries. They don't decide to let it go. Silence isn't peace. Silence is preparation. 4 mornings later, I was out behind the house checking a hose line when I heard tires rolling slow over gravel. Not the quick crunch of someone turning around because they took a wrong road. This was steady, confident. Like whoever it was had been there before in their mind. 2 vehicles pulled up to my gate. The first was a white SUV so clean it looked brand new, polished like it had never been on a dirt road in its life. The second one made my stomach drop. It was a dull gray sedan, plain and official looking, the kind of car you expect to see at a courthouse or parked outside a county building. Everything about it screamed authority, even if the authority was borrowed. The doors opened almost at the same time. Tracy stepped out of the SUV like she was arriving at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Calm, composed, that same tight smile that never reached her eyes. And behind her, a man climbed out of the sedan holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. Mid-40s, stiff posture, expression flat. A badge was clipped to his chest, just visible enough to do its job and make people second-guess themselves. Tracy walked up first, heels crunching on gravel, the wind barely moving her hair. "Morning, Mason," she said, sweet as syrup. "We're here for an emergency safety inspection." I blinked at her, then glanced at the man. "Emergency?" I repeated. "For what exactly?" The man didn't smile, didn't even pretend to. He flipped through his clipboard and spoke like he'd rehearsed this in the mirror. "We received reports regarding fire hazards in your equipment barn," he said. "Improper fuel storage, unsafe wiring, ventilation concerns, general risk to nearby property." Nearby property. That was how they said it, like my barn was a ticking bomb aimed at their neighborhood. Tracy folded her hands in front of her chest and nodded like she was disappointed in me, like I'd failed a test she invented. "We're just trying to protect the community," she said. That word again, community. The same word they used to justify everything, like it was holy. Like it gave them permission to crawl across my life and call it responsibility. Except I wasn't part of their community. I wasn't in their HOA. I didn't sign their rules. I didn't pay their dues. They had no right to step 1 foot past my gate. I wanted to slam it shut in their faces. But something felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Not just annoying. Not just invasive. Wrong. The man's eyes weren't looking at me like someone trying to fix a problem. They were sharp, calculating. Like he was scanning for something specific. So I did the one thing I hated doing. I let them in. I swung the gate open just wide enough and said, "Fine. You can look, but you don't touch anything." Tracy walked past me like she owned the ground. The man followed without hesitation, and the moment he stepped inside my barn, I knew. He wasn't inspecting. He was studying. He moved slowly, not like someone checking for violations, but like someone memorizing a layout. His eyes ran over every detail like they were being filed away for later. Fuel drums near the back wall. Old extension cords running to the generator. The wiring route along the beams. The side door that opened toward the brush line. He paused. Wrote something down. Then stepped a few feet and paused again, like he was building a mental map. Tracy stayed just behind him, quiet, watching him watch. Her face didn't show concern. It showed satisfaction, like this was exactly what she wanted. I felt my skin tighten, because I realized what I was seeing. This wasn't about safety. This was reconnaissance. A dry run. A plan being built right in front of me. I stepped forward. "Are we done here?" The man didn't even look guilty. He snapped his clipboard shut with a sharp little click that sounded final. "No fines today," he said. "But this is concerning." Concerning. That one word made my jaw clench. It meant nothing on paper, but it meant everything in court, everything in reports, everything when someone needed to paint a picture of blame. Tracy gave me that polished smile again. "We'd hate for something tragic to happen, Mason." Tragic. She said it like she was reading a headline. They turned to leave like they'd just done me a favor. I followed them out, watching every step, and right before Tracy climbed back into her SUV, she stopped and looked at me like she wanted to make sure her last sentence sank deep enough to bruise. "I'll say it once more," she said softly, almost casually. "This land isn't just yours anymore." Then she tilted her head, like she was giving advice instead of issuing a threat. "There are people with big plans, Mason. Don't make yourself an obstacle." Her SUV door shut. The window hid her face behind dark glass. The gray sedan started first, the SUV following right after. They rolled away slow and controlled, like they'd completed a task. I stood there long after the vehicles disappeared. The barn door opened behind me, the air suddenly feeling colder than it should have. Then I turned back and looked inside my barn again, at the fuel drums, the wiring, the exits. The corners he stared at too long, and it hit me like a hard punch to the chest. They didn't come to protect anyone. They came to collect information. and whatever they were planning next was going to start right here. That evening, when the sun finally dipped behind the trees and the light drained out of the sky, I didn't go inside like I normally would. I stayed out there, right by the barn. I dragged an old bucket over and sat on it like some tired guard dog that refused to leave its post. My phone was in one hand, my flashlight in the other, and every few minutes I caught myself holding my breath, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. The ground was bone dry. The kind of dry that makes dead grass crackle under your boots like brittle paper. The wind wouldn't settle either. It kept switching directions, low one minute, sharp the next, almost like it couldn't decide where it wanted trouble to go. I stared into the darkness and listened. Not for coyotes, not for owls. For footsteps, for tires, for tires. For any sound that didn't belong. But nothing came. And somehow, that made it worse. Because when you're expecting a storm, silence feels like the pressure right before lightning strikes. Around midnight, I got up and walked my fence line. Then I walked it again. I checked every lock twice. I tugged the barn door like it might suddenly swing open on its own. I even looked over my fuel storage like I was the one who'd done something wrong, as if I was trying to prove to myself that there wasn't a single crack someone could wedge a lie into later. By 2 a.m, my eyes burned from staying open too long. My shoulders ached from carrying tension like a backpack full of rocks. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself I was letting Tracy get inside my head. I told myself nobody was going to risk their life trespassing on my land over an argument about property. But then, right around 3, I heard it, a rustle in the brush. Not the soft movement of an animal passing through. This was heavier, slower, like something trying not to make noise. My heartbeat jumped so hard it felt like my chest tightened around it. I snapped my flashlight toward the sound, sweeping the beam across the weeds and tall grass like a spotlight. Nothing. No shape. No shadow. Just the wind breathing through the brush and my own paranoia staring back at me. Still, I didn't sleep after that, because even when you don't see someone, you can feel when you're not alone in your own mind. The next morning, I did the smartest thing I could think of. I tried to remove every excuse they could use. I called an electrician. A real one, not some HOA inspector with a clipboard and borrowed authority. This guy showed up in a dusty truck with real tools, real experience, and the kind of honest face you only get from years of working in places where people don't care about politics, just whether something works or doesn't. I didn't dump the whole story on him. I didn't mention Tracy. I didn't mention threats. I just said I wanted my barn checked over, cleaned up, upgraded. He took his time. He opened panels, tested lines, traced wiring routes, frowned at a few things, and nodded at others. He scribbled notes, but the kind of notes that lead to repairs, not accusations. Finally, he wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me. "Your barn isn't perfect," he said plainly. "But it's not some ticking time bomb either. I've seen way worse still standing." That sentence stayed with me like a stone in my stomach. Because if it wasn't a ticking time bomb, then why was Tracy trying so hard to make it sound like one? That's when something inside me shifted. I stopped thinking like a man being harassed and started thinking like a man being set up. I grabbed my phone and started documenting everything. Not casually, thoroughly. I took photos of every lock on every door, close-ups, wide angles, multiple shots like I was building a case file. I photographed the fuel drums with labels visible, the wiring routes, the breaker panel, the exits, the floor space, the paths between equipment. Anything someone could point at later and twist into unsafe. Then I went one step further. I drove into town and bought 2 cameras. Not the cheap kind that barely work, the kind that record clear footage. The kind with night vision, the kind that don't care how dark it gets. I mounted one facing the barn from the house. the other from a tree line that gave me a clean angle of the side entrance and the brush behind it. Because I wasn't going to let anyone write the story of my downfall without proof. If someone tried something, I wanted it recorded. I wanted their confidence caught on video. For the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of control, like I'd finally done something instead of just reacting. That night, I locked up, checked the cameras twice, and went inside, trying to convince myself that the worst of it was in my head. Then came the sound, a heavy bang. Not thunder, not a tree falling, not the usual creak of the farm settling in the night. This was violent. Final. It hit the air like a punch. My whole body reacted before I could think. My heart jumped, my hands went cold, and my feet were moving before my brain even caught up. I sprinted outside so fast the screen door slapped behind me, and the second I cleared the porch, my breath stopped. My barn was already burning, not a little flame. Not smoke creeping up from a corner. It was on fire like it had been waiting for the match. Flames climbed the wall in wild orange sheets, snapping and curling upward with terrifying speed. The wind grabbed the heat and fed it, pushing it higher, brighter, louder. Smoke billowed out thick and black, swallowing the stars one by one. I stood there frozen for half a heartbeat, watching the place that held my livelihood turn into a furnace. Then my stomach twisted with a thought so sharp it felt like a knife. This wasn't an accident. This was the unexpected change, Tracy promised me. And whatever came next was going to destroy more than just my barn. It wasn't a small fire. It wasn't the kind of accident you shrug off and blame on bad luck. This was a blaze fast, hungry, and terrifyingly sure of itself, like it had been waiting for the exact right moment to explode. Flames climbed the barn wall in thick, twisting sheets, licking upward like something alive. The heat slammed into my face from 30 feet away, scorching my skin and tightening my lungs. Smoke poured out so heavy and black it swallowed the sky, blotting out the stars one by one until the whole night looked sick and bruised. I fumbled my phone and called 911 so fast my fingers slid across the screen. When the dispatcher answered, I could barely get the words out. My throat was already burning. "My barn's on fire," I choked. "It's spreading. Please hurry." While she asked me questions, address, nearest road, any people inside, my mind wasn't even in the conversation anymore. It was screaming one name like it was the only thing that made sense. Tracy Whitmore. Because this didn't feel random. It didn't feel natural. It felt planned. I didn't have time to stand there and stare. The barn could be replaced. Equipment could be replaced. But my animals couldn't. I sprinted toward the pasture, lungs pumping smoke, eyes watering so badly the world blurred at the edges. The glow behind me lit the ground in flickering orange like the earth itself was on fire. The animals were already panicking. They didn't understand flames or property lines. They just understood danger. They stamped and crowded together, eyes wide and glassy, breathing hard. The smoke confused them, the heat spooked them, and my shouting only made the fear spread faster through the herd. "Come on," I yelled, waving my arms like I could push terror out of them with pure willpower. "Move! Move!" I threw the pasture gates open so hard the metal slammed against the post. I ran along the fence line, shouting and waving, pushing them toward the far field, away from the barn, away from the smoke, away from the wind. For a few seconds, they wouldn't budge. Then one bolted. And once one moved, the rest followed like a flood, hooves pounding dirt, bodies colliding, breath steaming and frantic. I stayed with them, guiding them out, forcing the path wide enough so none of them got trapped. Then I heard the sound that made my blood turn cold. A sharp popping. Metal stressed by heat, fuel. My stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my spine. I whipped around, and that's when the fire changed. It didn't just grow, it burst. A wave of heat exploded outward like the barn had coughed flames into the open air. The blaze surged, roaring louder, brighter, angrier. Burning debris shot upward, embers flying like angry insects. The dry grass around the barn caught instantly, and suddenly the fire wasn't locked inside a building anymore. It was loose, running, and it moved with terrifying speed, sprinting across my land like it already knew where it wanted to go, toward my house. I ran back, heart hammering, grabbed the hose line, and cranked it open so hard I thought I'd break the valve. The hose jerked, then sputtered. A weak stream dribbled out, barely enough to wash a dirty truck, let alone fight a wall of flames. No, 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 I muttered, twisting the handle again like the pressure would magically return if I forced it. I tried the second hose line. Same thing, thin, weak, useless. It wasn't just low pressure. It felt wrong, like something had been tampered with. Like someone had made sure that when the time came, I'd have nothing in my hands but false hope and a plastic nozzle. My chest tightened, not just from smoke, but from the sudden, sickening thought, this wasn't just a fire. This was a trap. The flames crawled up my porch supports like a living thing, snapping and twisting in the wind. Heat warped the air so badly my house slipped like it was melting at the edges. Smoke rolled toward the roofline. For a moment, I honestly thought I was about to watch everything I've ever built disappear. Then the wind shifted. And in that split second, the fire stopped chasing only me. It turned. Like it had been redirected. Like the world itself had decided this disaster wasn't going to stay private. The flames leaned toward the back property line, toward the trees, the fences, the strip of manicured grass that separated my working land from Crystal Ridge Estates. And when the fire jumped that line, it happened so fast my brain couldn't process it. I watched their perfect lawn ignite like a fuse. One moment it was a neat green carpet trimmed to suburban perfection. The next moment it was lit up in crawling orange waves, racing straight toward their fences. The first HOA fence caught. Wood popped and crackled, collapsing in on itself like paper. Then the fire grabbed the next fence. Then the next. And suddenly the neighborhood that had spent months complaining about my tractor noise and farm smell was screaming in real fear. Doors flew open. People ran outside barefoot, half-dressed, panicking. Kids cried. Dogs barked like they were losing their minds. Someone dragged a cat carrier so hard it bounced off the pavement. Cars reversed in a frenzy, headlights cutting through smoke, bumpers clipping mailboxes, horns blaring. Their safe community turned into chaos in less than 5 minutes. And standing there with smoke in my lungs and ash sticking to my skin, I couldn't stop thinking the same thing over and over. Whoever started this didn't care who got burned. Not me. Not my animals. Not even the families on the other side of that fence. They lit a match like intimidation was a game, and now the whole neighborhood was paying for it. The sirens came in waves, one after another, stacking on top of each other until the night felt like it was screaming. First I heard the distant wail, thin at the edge of the smoke, then it grew louder and louder until the sound swallowed everything else. Fire engines tore down the road, rescue trucks right behind them, police cruisers weaving through the chaos with their lights strobing red and blue through the haze. The whole neighborhood turned into something unreal, like a nightmare lit by emergency lights. The smoke was so thick it blurred the world into shifting shadows. Streetlights became dull orbs. Houses looked like ghost outlines. Even the moon was gone, hidden behind the black cloud rolling over the land like it had weight. Firefighters didn't move like regular people. They moved like machines built for moments like this. They jumped off the trucks before the wheels had fully stopped. Boots hit pavement hard. Orders were shouted and immediately obeyed. Hoses uncoiled across the ground like giant snakes, dragged over lawns that residents used to measure with rulers and treat like sacred ground. Water blasted into the air in roaring white streams, slamming into burning fences and roof lines with enough force to knock ash loose in sheets. Teams split instantly, one group rushing toward my house, another racing into Crystal Ridge Estates, where the fire had already started chewing through their perfect backyards. I stood there on my driveway, soot smeared across my arms, throat raw from smoke, and I couldn't decide what to do with my hands. Everything felt too big for one person now, too fast, too loud, too out of control. A firefighter ran past me and yelled something I couldn't catch. Another shoved a mask into my hands and told me to get back, to stay clear, to stop breathing this garbage air. Their voices were sharp but not cruel focused, urgent. And still, my eyes kept drifting back to the same thing. The fire wasn't just burning. It was traveling. It didn't behave like an accident that stumbled into existence. It behaved like something that knew where it wanted to go. It crawled along dry grass in low waves, then leaped when it found wood. Fence posts ignited like matchsticks, trees caught with a sudden whoosh. Embers rose into the wind and drifted down onto rooftops like burning snowflakes. Every time one landed, my stomach tightened, because I knew what came next. Another spot, another flare, another scream, and in the middle of all that chaos, I saw her. Tracy Whitmore. She was standing near the entrance to the HOA neighborhood, just outside the heaviest smoke, as if she'd chosen the safest place to watch the world fall apart. She wasn't yelling directions. She wasn't dragging hoses. She wasn't trying to help anyone evacuate. She was just standing there with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the flames like she was watching a movie she didn't expect to be this intense. Her face wasn't confident anymore. It wasn't smug. It wasn't controlled. It was shocked. Like she expected a warning fire, a small message, a little fear that stayed neatly on my side of the fence. Not this, not a monster. For a split second, our eyes met through the smoke, and something passed across her expression that made my blood go cold. Not guilt, not regret. Fear. The kind of fear that only shows up when a person realizes they've lost control of something they thought they could manage. The fire hit my porch hard. I heard the crack before I even saw it, a sharp, brutal sound like a bone snapping. Part of the porch gave way and collapsed inward, throwing sparks into the air. My heart dropped straight through my chest. I thought that was it. I thought I was about to watch my whole house go up like the barn did. But the firefighters got there in time. Two of them took position near the front and angled the hose straight at the roofline. Water slammed into the flames again and again, blasting through smoke, turning parts of the fire into hissing steam. They worked fast, relentless, refusing to let it spread deeper into the structure. For a few minutes, it was a brutal tug-of-war. Fire climbed. Water pushed it back. Fire flared. Water hit harder, and slowly, painfully slowly, the flames began to lose momentum. They still burned, but they weren't sprinting anymore. They weren't roaring like they owned the night. They were finally being forced to retreat. Over in Crystal Ridge Estates, the situation was uglier. The fire had tasted their perfect neighborhood and didn't want to let go. It ran through backyard fences like they weren't even there. It crawled up patio furniture, jumped onto dry hedges, and snapped across rooftops like it was searching for the next weak spot. Families spilled into the streets with wide eyes and shaking hands, holding whatever they could save in seconds. People were crying, shouting names, counting heads. A woman ran past me, clutching a small dog to her chest like it was her baby. A man dragged a suitcase behind him, wheels bouncing uselessly over the curb. Someone's kid was barefoot, sobbing, looking back at a house that was already glowing orange from inside. That safe community they loved to brag about? It looked like panic on two legs. Hours passed in a blur of smoke and noise. Firefighters kept moving even when they looked exhausted, faces streaked with soot, shoulders straining under heavy gear. Police tried to keep roads clear for emergency vehicles, but everyone wanted to be everywhere at once. People fleeing, people searching, people refusing to leave because their lives were inside those walls. Eventually, long after midnight, the fire was finally contained. Not extinguished, contained, a difference that matters when your world has just burned. By the time dawn arrived, it was quiet again, but the quiet felt haunted. The sun rose over a neighborhood that didn't look like itself. My barn was gone. Nothing left but charred beams, twisted metal, and black ash that still held warmth if you got too close. My fields were scarred with long, dark streaks where the fire had run like a knife across the land. My house was still standing, but half of it looked wounded. Broken windows, blistered siding, smoke stains climbing up the walls like dirty fingerprints. And Crystal Ridge Estates, their perfect little development, looked like a war zone that had been pretending to be paradise. Burned fences, blackened lawns, damaged roofs. Fire crews still walking through with flashlights, checking for hot spots, making sure nothing reignited. Then came the questions. Officials spoke carefully, in those slow measured tones that sound responsible but leave room for anything. Could be electrical, could be fuel related. It may have been accidental. Accidental. That word hit my ears like someone trying to hand me a lie and expecting me to swallow it. Because I knew what I'd seen. I knew the timing, the threats, the inspection, the way that so-called safety guy walked through my barn like he was memorizing it. And while everyone else stared at the destruction wondering how it happened, I was thinking about my cameras. Because deep down, I had this feeling, this cold, steady certainty, that the truth was sitting in my footage right now, waiting to be pulled out of the dark. The next morning, the world moved on like it always does after disaster, cold, practical, and painfully quiet. The fire trucks were gone. The flashing lights were gone. Even the shouting and panic had faded into exhausted silence. All that was left was smoke hanging low in the air like a dirty fog, and the smell, that harsh, bitter mix of burned wood, melted plastic, and fuel that clings to the back of your throat like it doesn't ever want to leave. I walked out to what used to be my barn, and my boots sank into ash with every step. The ground looked like someone had dumped charcoal across it. Twisted metal curled up from the wreckage like dead vines. Black beams leaned at unnatural angles, snapped and softened by heat. Everything I relied on, tools, machinery, storage, years of work, was reduced to a skeleton. And then came the investigators. Not firefighters, not heroes. The clipboard crowd. They stepped carefully through the ruins, snapping photos, poking at debris, murmuring to each other in calm voices like they were reviewing a routine job site. Their jackets were clean. Their gloves were spotless. They didn't have soot smeared across their faces or fatigue in their eyes. They didn't carry the weight of the night the way I did. One of them finally approached me, the fire marshal. He looked sympathetic in the way officials always do when they're trained to keep distance from emotions. "We're still reviewing," he said. "Right now, the cause is inconclusive." I stared at him, waiting. He cleared his throat and delivered the most insulting sentence I'd heard in my entire life. "It may have been accidental." Accidental. My throat tightened so hard it felt like a hand was closing around it. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't throw my arms up and demand he use his eyes. Because anger wouldn't help me here. Anger was loud, and loud gets dismissed. Loud gets labeled unstable, emotional, irrational. Loud gets turned into a grieving man looking for someone to blame. But I had something stronger than anger. I had cameras. That night, after the officials cleared out and the sky turned bruised gray with leftover smoke, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off. The house smelled like wet ash and burned insulation. Every surface felt gritty. The silence inside was worse than the noise outside, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I opened my laptop with trembling hands. For a second I hesitated, because deep down I already knew what I was going to find, and once you know, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to thinking the world is fair. I pulled up the footage. At first, it was just darkness. Wind. A faint sway of tall grass. The night looking normal, innocent, almost peaceful. Then, movement. Two figures, not animals. Not shadows. People. People were dressed head to toe like ghosts, hoods pulled up, gloves on, faces hidden. And the way they moved, it didn't look like bored teenagers trespassing. It didn't look like drunk troublemakers wandering around. It looked professional, low, controlled, deliberate. They hugged the edge of the barn like they knew exactly where my cameras were aimed, like they'd studied angles, like they'd practiced staying out of sight. One of them crouched near the barn wall and pulled something out of a bag. I leaned closer to the screen, heart hammering. The other stood watch, head turning slowly like a lookout. Then they slipped behind the barn right into the dead space my camera couldn't fully see, and seconds later, the first flicker of fire lit up the night like a cruel sunrise. My stomach turned so violently, I had to grab the table to steady myself. I rewound it. Again, and again, and again. Every time I watched it, my chest got tighter, my hands got colder, my skin crawled like my body was screaming the same message my mind was finally forced to accept. This wasn't a theory. This wasn't paranoia. This was proof. The kind of proof that doesn't care how powerful someone thinks they are. The next morning, I marched that footage straight to law enforcement, and I didn't stop there, because I knew exactly what would happen if I trusted the system to handle it alone. The HOA would circle up. They'd call it unfortunate. They'd blame farm conditions. They'd drown the truth in paperwork until the story died. So I hired a private investigator, not a friend of a friend, not a neighborhood guy with a business card, a real one. Within days, the dominoes started falling fast and loud. They traced burner phones, short calls, strange timing, payments that weren't supposed to exist. Connections that didn't show up in public, but showed up clearly when you knew where to look, and the timeline matched Tracy's pressure campaign perfectly. The letters, the threats, the inspection, then fire. But the worst part, the part that made my blood run cold, was the discovery that Tracy wasn't acting alone. She had help. Not from residents who genuinely cared about safety, from a developer, a man with deep pockets and bigger patience, who wanted my land so badly he was willing to burn the edges of a neighborhood to get it. That's when everything exploded in Crystal Ridge Estates. Residents didn't want careful investigation anymore. They wanted a villain. And Tracy gave them one. Overnight, her supporters turned into strangers. Her friends in the community stopped answering calls. People who used to clap for her at HOA meetings started whispering her name like it was poison. The next HOA meeting was packed so tight people stood in the hallway. Tracy walked in trying to wear her leadership like armor chin high, shoulders back, that familiar fake calm. But I could see it. She was shaking. Not her hands, not dramatically. Her whole energy, like the ground under her confidence, wasn't solid anymore. The meeting started in the usual fake professional tone until one neighbor stood up and screamed so loudly it cracked the room open like a gunshot. "You burned our homes!" Another voice piled on top of it, raw with rage and betrayal. "We trusted you." Tracy tried to talk over them, tried to force the room into silence with that same voice she always used, sharp, practiced, commanding. But this wasn't a rule violation meeting. This was a reckoning. She snapped. She pointed at me like I was the real threat. She tried to blame my barn, my fuel, my unsafe farm. She tried to turn the whole disaster into my fault, and for a second I felt the room wobble, like her lies might still work. Then my investigator stood up calmly. No shouting, no emotion, just truth. He looked directly at Tracy and said 5 words that dropped into the room like a funeral bell. "We have video proof." Tracy's face drained white so fast it was almost unreal. Her mouth opened like she had a speech ready, but nothing came out, because there's no speech strong enough to survive evidence. And in that moment, watching the Queen of Crystal Ridge Estates freeze under the weight of the truth, I knew something with complete certainty. Her reign was over. The case moved faster than I expected, faster than anyone expected. Once the footage surfaced, this stopped being a quiet farm dispute on the edge of town. It became a county-level nightmare. A public embarrassment, a liability bomb with a short fuse. The kind of story officials hate because it makes them look powerless, and the kind of story insurance companies hate because it costs real money. Crystal Ridge residents weren't willing to let it fade into a convenient accident either. Not after they'd watched their fences burn, their lawns turn black, and their neighbors run into the street with children and pets in their arms. Everybody wanted answers now. And Tracy Whitmore? She suddenly wasn't smiling anymore. The first hearing felt like stepping into a different universe, one where the air was cold, the walls were too white, and every word mattered more than emotion ever could. My clothes were clean, but I still felt dirty inside. Like the smoke had soaked into me deeper than skin. Tracy showed up with a lawyer who looked expensive. Sharp suit, smooth voice, the kind of man who speaks like he's never lost anything that mattered. He walked in like the courtroom was already tilted in their favor. And from the moment he started talking, I knew their strategy. Not denial, deflection. He didn't claim Tracy was innocent like an honest person would. He tried to make the fire feel understandable. He tried to paint it as an unfortunate chain reaction that could have happened to anyone, especially someone like me. He blamed my barn wiring. He blamed my fuel storage. He blamed the nature of agricultural property. He said I was reckless, negligent, irresponsible. He called the fire tragic, and somehow said it like I should have apologized for it. But the truth doesn't care about clean suits and careful wording, because the footage didn't show faulty wiring. It didn't show an accident. It showed two people creeping across my land like thieves in the night. It showed intent. The moment my lawyer played that video in court, the room changed. You could feel it. The shift in the air, the way the judge leaned forward slightly, the way even people sitting in the back held their breath. The screen glowed in the dim courtroom, and the footage ran quiet, grainy, and cold. Two figures, hooded, gloved, moving like they knew exactly what they were doing. And when the first flicker of fire appeared right after they vanished behind the barn, no one could unsee it. Tracy's lawyer tried to talk over it. He tried to reframe it, like he could twist reality with enough confidence. But then came the private investigator's report. And that's what really crushed the last of their excuses. Because it wasn't just video anymore. It was a trail. Payments made through strange channels, routed in ways normal people don't use unless they're trying not to be caught. Messages from burner phones, short, coded, timed too perfectly to be coincidence. A timeline that lined up like a cruel checklist. The offer. The threats. The fake notices. The inspection. Then fire. Then I learned the most disgusting part of it all. That inspector who walked through my barn with Tracy. The one with the badge and clipboard and that dead-eyed stare. He wasn't a real inspector. Not county, not state. Not fire safety. He wasn't even licensed the way he claimed to be. He was a paid consultant. And the badge? Fake. Borrowed authority, designed for one purpose, to intimidate me and collect information. That reveal hit the courtroom like a punch to the throat. Because it proved what I'd felt in my bones from the beginning, that inspection wasn't about safety. It was about planning. They wanted to know where everything was. Fuel storage, wiring routes, entry points, blind spots. Not to prevent a fire, but to make one believable. And then there was Tracy's own mouth, her own words, coming back to haunt her like a curse she'd spoken too confidently. My lawyer played the recording again. Some things change unexpectedly. The judge listened. The room listened. And suddenly it didn't sound like a coincidence. It sounded like a promise, like Tracy knew exactly what was coming. That's when her expression cracked. Not fully, not dramatically, but enough. A tightening around her jaw. a flicker in her eyes, a subtle panic she couldn't hide behind makeup or posture. She'd spent her whole life believing rules were weapons and that people like me would fold under pressure. But evidence doesn't fold. Evidence doesn't get intimidated. The ruling came down like thunder. Tracy was removed from her HOA position immediately, not pending review, not after discussion. Immediately. She was barred from serving in any HOA leadership role again, and the board was placed under legal supervision so they couldn't quietly reinstall a new version of her in a different outfit. The HOA itself got hammered penalties, fees, oversight, restrictions. They lost their ability to bully outsiders and hide behind community rules like a shield. And the developer behind all of it? The one who thought my farm was an obstacle worth burning? He backed out so fast it was almost funny. One day, his people were pushing and whispering behind the scenes. The next day, he was gone, banished like a coward when the heat turned toward him. My settlement covered the damages, not all of them, because money doesn't rebuild history. It doesn't restore the barn my father used. It doesn't erase the smell of smoke from my nightmares. But it covered enough to rebuild. Enough to recover, enough to stand back up instead of being buried. And maybe the biggest change wasn't what happened to Tracy. It was what happened to everyone else. Because the people of Crystal Ridge Estates finally understood something they never wanted to admit before, the farm wasn't the problem. The farm was just an inconvenience they wanted erased. The real danger was the HOA itself, and the kind of person it turned into a king. It took months for the smoke smell to fade. Even after the walls were repaired and the porch was rebuilt, there were mornings I'd wake up and swear I could still taste fire in the back of my throat, like the ash had settled somewhere deeper than my lungs, somewhere in my memory. Trauma doesn't pack up and leave just because a judge signs paperwork and calls you the winner. You can't close a chapter like that and expect your body to forget what it felt like to watch your life burn. But I did win, not because I'm tougher than everybody else, not because I'm some unstoppable hero. The truth is, I got scared. I got angry. I got exhausted. There were nights I sat in silence and wondered if it would have been easier to take the money, sign the papers, and disappear before things turned into flames and headlines. But Tracy Whitmore made the same mistake people like her always make. She believed control was the same thing as power. She believed rules were stronger than truth. That money could erase consequences. That intimidation would make me fold like a lawn chair. Instead, she lit a match and burned down her own kingdom. Crystal Ridge Estates changed after that. Residents stopped treating the HOA like some untouchable authority and started treating it like what it really was, a group of people who needed oversight, limits, and accountability. They demanded transparency, replaced half the board, and rewrote policies so no one person could ever hold that kind of unchecked power again. The fear Tracy used to rule with didn't survive the fire. And my land? It's still here. Scarred, yes. Different, yes. But standing. The farm is rebuilding piece by piece. The animals are safe. The soil is healing. And every time I look across that property line, I remember something I'll never forget again. Some people will do anything to take what you love until they realize you're willing to fight for it. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?